Welcome to Back in the Day. When I was a kid, back in the 1960s, I would often hear those of my parents' and grandparents' generation speak of the extreme hardship and frustration they endured during the Great Depression years of the 1930s. For them, that era was recent history, and they could still feel the sting of those uncertain and challenging times. Those of us who were born after World War II have never faced such a prolonged period of hopelessness and despair. Nothing in our experience can compare to that time. This is the story of that time, what the Depression years meant for America, how our forebears dealt with the extreme challenges of the time, and what changes the experience brought to our nation and our culture. In Part 1, we examined the events and circumstances that led to the Depression years. The so-called Roaring Twenties were a time of prosperity in America. Average income rose. Business and industry moved toward a shorter work week, which provided more leisure time, and new consumer products promised easier and better lives for everyone. But the good times wouldn't last forever. How did we get from boom to bust so quickly? Were there warning signs along the way? If so, were those warnings ignored? Let's take a look. Although many point to the stock market crash of October 1929 when asked to explain the cause of the Great Depression, that event was more a symptom of the coming disaster than a cause. In fact, there were a great number of economic, political, and other factors that combined in just the right way to create a perfect storm at that point in our history. If just some of those things had been avoided, the economy may have merely entered a period of recession, instead of plunging the nation into our deepest depression. The seeds of calamity may have been planted in the economic boom that followed the many technological advances of the post-World War I era of the 1920s. Without the burden of supporting a large military force in Europe, American farmers were producing more than enough food to feed the nation. Newly popular consumer goods such as radio, refrigerators, washing machines, and better, faster automobiles were produced in record numbers, bringing down the prices of these goods to levels at which they were affordable to middle-class American families. This was also the age in which consumer credit became an entrenched element of American culture. Those much sought-after appliances could be had for only $5 down and $5 a month. There was a construction boom, and they were developing less expensive building materials and methods. This brought more affordable housing to the masses. You could even build a new house from a kit. Banks and other financial institutions made mortgages available to millions of people who would have never been able to pay cash for a roof over their heads. The manufacturing and other industries were booming. This put more money into the pockets and bank accounts of most Americans. There was a move toward a shorter average work week. That meant there was extra time and money for entertainment and recreation. It appeared that America's time had arrived. This was also the age in which middle-class Americans discovered the stock market. Long an important economic tool of the wealthy, the increase in disposable income, coupled with rapidly rising stock prices fueled by record industrial output, was suddenly an attractive option for those hoping to move upward in society. This went well for a while. Large numbers of investors meant that companies could expand and produce even more of the goods we craved. Soon, people were taking out loans to provide money for stock investments. Consumer debt soon increased significantly, although virtually all these new investors were convinced that the boom would last forever. However, one consequence of the rapid increase in stock prices was that stocks, due to forces of supply and demand, were soon worth more than the economic health and real earnings of the companies could justify. This runaway gravy train was fueled by pure speculation and dreams. Toward the end of the decade, the bubble showed signs of stress. There were downturns in the market, but all were sure that those signs were a temporary adjustment. There was no need to worry, but in reality, there was much to worry about. The economy couldn't last for long if it was propped up by air and promises. Another significant factor developed as a result of rapid growth in our urban areas. The growth of industry meant that there were many new jobs in the cities. Millions of Americans left farms and small towns in the South and the West to seek better wages in the factories. However, the increase in city population meant that much more infrastructure was required in order to provide for all of the people. Public services and utilities could not keep up with the inflow of migrants. As a result, many of America's cities became overcrowded and unhealthy. When the bubble finally burst, there was not enough real wealth to run the country. Banks were faced with massive debt they could not collect. The downturn began as an ordinary recession in the summer of 1929, and the stock market reached its peak in early September, only to crash in late October. On the 24th of that month, Black Thursday, the market lost more than 10% of its value right after trading began for the day. Hoping to stem the selling frenzy, a group of bankers pooled their resources and attempted to turn the tide, and it worked for just one day. The Dow Jones average was down only 6 points at the end of that day, and there was cautious optimism on the trading floor. However, when the market opened the following Monday, there was a massive resurgence of panic, and $30 billion was lost over the next 2 days. Over the coming months, there were feeble attempts at recovery, but the general trend was downward. Combined with other factors, the stage was set for a perfect storm. Many people blamed President Herbert Hoover for the Great Depression. This view persists even to the present day. However, I believe that if one considers the facts at hand and the perspective of the time, that assertion may be somewhat less than fair. In that age, government was hesitant to interfere in the affairs of business, viewing the two as separate spheres of influence. In addition, America possessed a strong work ethic, and many were extremely hesitant to go on the dole. President Hoover was of the opinion that the best way to get the economy going was to provide loans and other assistance to industry so that companies could rehire America's workers and produce more real wealth. Many scoff at this trickle-down theory, but there was some rebound in the stock market in early 1930s, and wages held steady through the end of that year. Whether or not this approach was appropriate may be debated at some length without reaching a definite conclusion. It can't be known if the result of these policies might have been different if given more time. In any case, things did not get much better. The Great Depression came on gradually, but by the end of 1930, unemployment had risen to 9%, and the banks began to fail. Soon, panic ensued, and worried investors rushed to the banks to try to withdraw their deposits before cash reserves were depleted, resulting in the famous bank runs common to the early Depression years. Citizens owed much more money than they could make. Manufacturers suddenly had warehouses full of goods that they couldn't sell. Prices fell, and companies across the nation cut production and laid off millions of workers. The storm had arrived. In Part 2, we will look at how incoming President Franklin Delano Roosevelt dealt with the crisis and how the deepening depression affected those in America's large urban areas. I hope you'll join us.